us life again. Breathe on us now. Fill us with your love. Send us with your power. Spirit of God.
Good morning. So I'd like to kind of recap the reading, sort of like a Twitter version of the reading, just to break it down into smaller bite-sized pieces. So we have this warrior, this guy named Naaman, and he has leprosy. Now we know people with leprosy, generally speaking, are kind of pushed out of town. But this guy was so valuable to the king that they kept him around because, hey, why not? The guy's of great value. So they keep him around. Now, they have this, Naaman and his wife have this servant, this prisoner of war, this slave that they acquired in one of the lands that they have conquered. And she whispers to Naaman's wife, hey, if we could just get your husband to Israel to see that guy, he can be cured. So he gathers up a pile of money and goes off to see the king. And the king gets offended because, well, the king just got offended, whatever. Not a huge part of the story. So then, Elisha hears of this. The prophet Elisha hears of this and sends someone to Naaman. And he ends up in front of his house, and what does he expect? He expects Elisha to come running out and do some cool magic stuff and heal him, right? And what does Elisha do? He sends out some messenger and says, go jump in the water 7 times, go jump in the river 7 times, and you'll be clean. So what happens? Naaman's like, yes, no, he gets mad, right? Because Elisha can't even take the time to go see him. What a whiny punk, right? So Naaman gets ticked off. He's like, I'm not doing this. But then his servants say, hey, if that guy would have given you something big to do, you'd have done it, right? Why not try this? So he goes, immerses himself in the river 7 times, and he's healed, right? So there's a message in that. Oftentimes when we say a prayer, we want some big, huge bolt of lightning or something like that to just knock us over and go, wow, God answered my prayers. We want that, right? We want that wow factor. But sometimes God acts in small ways that aren't always noticeable right away. Sometimes God acts in our lives in ways that we don't always see, that aren't always obvious at the time. Now we understand that, right? We understand that, right? Yes. Whew. Good, because that's not what I want to preach about today. I want you guys to understand that because it's really important that God works in small ways. God works in small ways in our lives, and we have to recognize that and be aware of that. But you guys said you got it, right? All right. So here's what I really want to talk about. I want to talk about who moves the story along. I want to talk about who moves the ball forward. I don't want to use that analogy because I'm a Penn State fan and I'm a Florida fan, and neither one of them moved the ball anywhere yesterday. And somebody's back from Michigan. I don't know where you are. I shook their hand and welcome. That was really hard, right? Whew. We got trounced. I don't want to talk about that either because that's painful. But who in this story moves the story along? The servants, right? So this slave, this prisoner, says to the wife, hey, if we could just get him to Israel to see Elisha. Without her, the story stops. The story goes nowhere, right? And then he goes and he gets this message from a messenger. Go wash in the river. And he says, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to wash in the river. That's dumb. Why would I do that? Who moves the story along? The servants again say, hey, if he'd have given you some big, huge thing to do, you'd have done it, right? And we would too. Jerry would. But if it's something small, it's like, yeah, I'm not gonna. But the servants move the story along. I'm going to give you an example. Think for a second of the best meal you've ever eaten. Got it? Now, I have a hard time with that because I've got a couple. I like to eat. So I'm going to go with my most recent. So my most recent favorite meal was in Houston, and it was brisket from Fegg's Barbecue. If you're ever in Houston, look this place up. It is the best thing I've ever eaten in my life. It is amazing. So when you get a good meal, what do you say? You say, compliments to the chef, right? But think about that for a second. If it wasn't for the farmer who grew it, if it wasn't for the laborer who harvested it, if it wasn't for the truck driver who got it to the food distributor, if it wasn't the food distributor getting it to the restaurant and the chef cooking it, you never would have ate that meal. Right? And that would be a shame. Dad, leave the waitstaff out, the waitstaff bring it to your table. Because the chef doesn't bring it to your table, at least not to mine. If it wasn't for all of those other people moving the story along, that food never would have reached your taste buds. That food never would have reached your taste buds. Well, the church is the same way. That wasn't supposed to be for dramatic effect. But the church is the same way. I've yet to hear a church call a pastor and say, Pastor, we would love for you to come in here. We have way too many people. Can you just get rid of some of them? And that's not just the Lutheran church, that's not this church, that's any church anywhere. They've yet to say, Pastor, we'd really like you to come be a part of our ministry team here, and can you just get rid of some of those people? We've got too many. Nobody says that, right? Instead, the church says, we want to call a pastor who's going to bring in more people. They said that to you, right? They said it to me, too. Because churches say that. Every church says that. Well, here's the thing. It's not the pastor's job. It's part of our job, but it's not the pastor's job. It takes all of us pulling on the same rope in the same direction day after day, week after week, night after night. That's how it has to happen. It's not just the pastors. It's everybody. Without quality staff, quality leadership, quality people pulling on the same rope, the message of God's grace and God's love doesn't leave these doors. That's the reality. Now this is where the sermon gets ugly. There's less people over here, so I'm going to say it over here. I think I'm faster than most of you if I get a head start. So I'm going to use two 4-letter words. So you have to run fastest from. Stewardship and evangelism. Those are like the 2 4-letter words of the church, right? Because we can't talk about them. Sex, politics, money, stewardship, and evangelism. You can't talk about those things in church. They didn't teach me that in seminary, so we're going to talk anyway. You see, it takes every one of us using every one of our gifts, every one of our God-given gifts, to move the ball forward. It takes all of us. It takes that time that God has given us, those talents that God has given us, And yes, that other thing, the money that God has given us to move the ball forward, to take the gospel from here out the door. It does. Otherwise, the message never leaves the church. And I got to tell you, we are incredibly blessed. We're incredibly blessed to be in this space, in this community, with you all really blessed and talented people. We're blessed. As a ministry staff, we're blessed. And we know that the possibilities are endless. The possibilities to be the church today in this community right here, the possibilities are endless. They're only limited by our willingness to share our God-given gifts of time, talent, and treasure, and our capacity to imagine new ways to do ministry. We're limited by our imagination and our stewardship. That's it. And that's not to say that you all aren't generous, because you're an incredibly generous bunch. So don't hear that. But it takes those gifts that we've been given, that God has given us, to move the ball forward, to move the gospel out the door into the world. Now, this is where it also gets ugly, because we have to be willing to share the good news. We have to be willing to share it. So we now have these y'all are incredibly blessed and beautiful and talented people. But if we never take that message out the door, that's that evangelism word, if we never tell that story, the gospel never leaves. So tell them about what? What do we need to tell the world about? Well, first and foremost, we need to tell them about Jesus, right? We need to tell them about Jesus. And not, I don't mean, well, there was this guy that lived like 2,000 years ago, and he was born, and he was born in a manger because there was no room at the inn. And then he grew up, and there were all kinds of cool miracles, and he turned water into wine because that's all your favorite. And then he died and rose from the dead. That's not the story I want you to tell. Most people know that story. It's got to be personal. What does the life, death, and resurrection of Christ mean for you in your life? That's the story we have to tell. That's the story we have to be comfortable with, because this is a beautiful area. You guys could do a lot of things on a Sunday morning at 9:30. But you choose to come here. Why? Why do you get out of your comfortable bed and come here on Sunday morning? Because Christ makes it different in your life somehow. What is it? What is it about your relationship with Christ that drives you here? Now, for me, I'm an only child, and I am the poster child for only children. And if it wasn't for my relationship with Christ, my capacity to make bad choices is really good. I spent 15 years not going to church and made some kind of not so good choices. But you know what's amazing to me? I can look back now and see how God was with me through all of that. And I was never left. And that amazes me. That amazes me every day, that through my really winding path, God walked it with me. But you have a story too. You have a faith journey, and you have a relationship with Christ that you need to be able to tap into. And that's called an elevator speech. How long are you in an elevator? 2 minutes. In 2 minutes, from the time that door opens and you step onto the elevator and somebody else is there with you, can you tell them, I'm not saying you just run into an elevator and say, let me tell you about my relationship with Jesus Christ. But if someone asks, and you're in a situation to share your faith, can you do it in 2 minutes? Can you do it in 2 minutes? Awesome. That was supposed to be rhetorical, but I'm glad you answered. Now, the rest of that piece is why here? Why this place? Why is this the place you choose to spend your Sunday mornings. There's two elevator speeches. Your relationship with Christ and your relationship with Immanuel. What does this place mean to you? What does this place mean to the community? And why are you here? I'm glad you're here. But why? Because if we don't share those two things, the gospel never leaves our door. If we're not able to share those things, the gospel never leaves our door. And I think we can agree week after week when you just kind of click on the news or scroll through Twitter, if there's one thing the world needs, it's more Jesus. And we've got to be able to share that. We've got to be able to share what our relationship with Christ means. I said a few weeks ago, it's the balm that heals, but we've got to share it. And that's not always easy. What does Christ mean in your life? And what does this place mean to you and mean to the community? When we talk about you need to grow the church, that's where we start. Do myself and Pastor Rebecca and Cheryl and the praise team and the rest of the staff and Jennifer, do we have a role to play? Absolutely. But if it's just us, we can make a lot of noise. Jennifer can't make pudding, but she can make a lot of noise. We've got to be willing to share. We've got to be willing to share that love and grace of Christ for the sake of the world. Amen.